Ecuador's conservative president, Guillermo Lasso, has announced he will veto a bill that will allow abortion in cases of rape. As Russia warns of Western attempts to provoke a conflict with Ukraine, the United States continues to send arms and military personnel to Kiev. The Economic Community of West African States said in a statement on Tuesday that Burkina Faso's ousted President Kabore resigned under threat, intimidation and pressure from the military. From the headquarters of TeleSUR English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South. I'm your anchor, Gladys Quesada, and these are the news that we begin in Ecuador, where conservative President Guillermo Lasso has announced he will veto a bill that will allow abortion in cases of rape. The bill is being debated by Congress to regulate abortion in cases of rape after the Constitutional Court decriminalized abortion in all such cases almost a year ago. In an interview, President Lasso said he was determined to veto the bill if passed, as he doesn't believe in abortion. After a debate of more than a year, the Parliamentary Justice Committee presented a report to the plenary proposing that girls and adolescents under 18 years of age, victims of rape, can freely and voluntarily interrupt pregnancy up to 22 weeks of gestation, while women of over 18 years of age can terminate the pregnancy due to rape after 20 weeks, I beg your pardon. As the final debate commenced on Tuesday, lawmakers called for more time to make a decision on the bill. In Ecuador, the militarization of the city of Guayaquil continues in the face of rising violent crime. Our correspondent, Henry Pillajo, has the story.
The city of Guayaquil is once again making headlines in the country. This time, insecurity is the key word. Already there have been 180 violent deaths since the beginning of the year. In social media, users are exposing the severity of the crimes, a reality not shown in the country's broadcasting network.
The onset and the shallowness of some cases is giving an opening to a government of the likes of this one, Guillermo Lasso's government, which has finally proven to be unable to handle the violence in the correctional system and is powerless, for it can't control the high levels of violence.
Shootings and murders in Guayaquil have forced Lasso and local authorities to answer people's claims in order to gain back the citizenship's trust in the institutions. Among the most urgent measures stands the deployment of police and armed forces personnel throughout the streets of the city.
The first actions will be coordinating the presence of 1,100 police agents who will join those already active in the city. They will back up ground operations to protect and secure the streets alongside the armed forces.
The government holds accountable for the rise in violent crimes, the fight against drug trafficking. However, experts affirm the problem causes can be traced back to structural weaknesses and the abandonment of policies with social benefits.
All this violent death heighten the perception of insecurity, a more pressing issue with every day that passes. This is the tip of the iceberg of a structural problem that Ecuador has been suffering for a long time now, for at least 5 years, with poverty growing deeper in society and inequality as a constant in the equation. Everything else results in death and an increasing perception of insecurity.
Another one of the government's shock measures is the substitution of the chief of police. Also, the executive chair announced the submission of a bill in the nation's parliament that seeks to regulate the progressive use of force for police and military agents.
I think the president is wrong because this project is already being assessed in the commission. The executive has not sent his team of surveyors and has not appeared before the Commission of Sovereignty and Overall Security in an efficient way. The Commission's board have been more than willing and are working on all of the laws needed to solve the problem that today haunts the Ecuadorian citizens.
According to a recent study carried out by the survey and data company Click, nearly 42% of the interviewed subjects said insecurity and delinquency were two of the most concerning problems in Guayaquil.
Henry Pillajo, TeleSUR, Ecuador.
Thank you, Henry, for this report, and now we continue. In Guatemala, 5 former paramilitaries were sentenced to 30 years in prison for the rape of more than 30 indigenous women during the military dictatorship. More details with our correspondent, Santiago Odon.
Guatemala Supreme Court determined that 5 former policemen committed sexual violence against Maya-Achi women between 1982 and 1983.
Treating the women worse than animals, forcing them to have sex violently, using force, tying them up, threatening them with weapons or telling them that they were going to kill them if they did not agree to be with them.
The former police officers were sentenced to 30 years in prison for crimes against humanity as determined by the court.
For them, it was very important a court decided as they did, that they believed in the word, because that is what has been questioned during the criminal proceedings. So for us, this decision has been very important.
This sentence exposes and officially states the inhumane nature of the Guatemalan government against its own people as sentenced by a genocide survivor.
It is the shame of a state that raged against them, against defenseless girls, and I think it is necessary to condemn these acts.
It is a historic sentence achieved by Mayan women from several communities in Pinal, Baja Verapaz, which has been ignored by the corporate media according to social groups.
This is what hits the memory of the perpetrators of genocide, hits the memory of the human rights violators, the rapists.
In more than 30 years, this is the 4th case brought to justice by women who survived the genocide in Guatemala. The National Coordinator of Widows of Guatemala estimates the military dictatorship, which intensified in the 1980s, left more than 60,000 women who suffer some form of sexual violence.
Santiago Botón, TeleSUR, Ciudad de Guatemala.
Thank you, Santiago, for the story. Now we continue to other topics. On March 30th, elections for the Colombian Congress will take place. In this context, and as a historic step, 16 candidates will be elected to occupy the so-called peace seats. However, the Electoral Observation Mission has warned of the risks of violence and the fraud in municipalities and departments where the special transitional electoral districts for peace were established as part of the 2016 peace agreements. Our correspondent, Hernan Tobar, has the details.
The Electoral Observation Mission in Colombia released a report showing the electoral risk maps for 19 departments and 167 municipalities, where the elections will be held for victims of the conflict to occupy the 16 peace seats in Congress as representatives of the special transitional electoral districts.
What this consolidated map of indicative risk of both violence and electoral fraud is telling us is that we have 90 municipalities, that is to say 58% of the 177 municipalities are at some level of indicative risk of both violence and electoral fraud. Of these municipalities, 43 are at extreme risk.
It is the peasant and ethnic leaders who aspire to occupy these seats in the Colombian House of Representatives, as stipulated in the peace agreements. But with this alert, where more than 40 municipalities are at extreme risk, it is expected that both the participation of citizens and the guarantees for the development of campaign activities by the candidates and the population in these territories will be complex.
This means that at the same time that there is a presence of illegal armed groups who are active in these territories, which generates an almost complete denial of political rights, we also have a history of atypical electoral behavior due to the electoral transhumance, vote buying, and irregular financing of political campaigns.
The departments where the most extreme risk was identified in some of their municipalities are Nariño, Cauca, and Valle del Cauca, where the Electoral Observation Mission found the presence of residual paramilitary groups, the active presence of drug traffickers, as well as FARC dissidents and ELN guerrillas, sparking displacements and political clans that co-opt some candidates.
The peasants came from the highlight, fleeing the conflict and settled in urban areas, and now they cannot exercise their rights to elect their representative to the chamber because they lost their land, they lost their opportunities, and they had to stay in the towns experiencing hardships. So how are we going to win the seats for victims where this is being managed by people who have money? People who are used to asking the people to vote for them in exchange for crumbs. And when they are in power, they forget them because they have already paid for their work.
It is precisely in some departments of the Andean Pacifico region where the risk is extreme. On January 24th alone, Representative, Indigenous leader, and former coordinator of the Indigenous Guard, Jose Albeiro Camayo, was assassinated in the municipality of Buenos Aires, in Cauca department. A total of 10 social leaders have been assassinated so far this 2022.
We'll be right back after this very short break, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. As Russia warns of Western attempts to provoke a conflict with Ukraine, the United States continues to send arms and military personnel to Kiev. While spreading fears of a Russian invasion of Ukraine, the U.S. and its NATO allies have simultaneously been escalating their military encirclement of Russia and reinforcing their presence in the neighboring country. A U.S. plane carrying military equipment and munitions landed in Kiev on Tuesday, the third shipment of a $200 million security package announced by the U.S. President Joe Biden. The U.S. Defense Department has also said about 8,500 U.S. troops have been put on heightened alert and are awaiting orders to deploy NATO's eastern flank. Meanwhile, Moscow is still waiting for an answer on its list of security demands, including a guarantee that Ukraine will never be allowed to join the North Atlantic Treaty Organization and that the alliance forces pull back from the region. Venezuela's human rights record was examined by the United Nations Human Rights Council's Universal Periodic Review Working Group for the third time on Tuesday in a meeting that was webcasted live. The delegation of Venezuela was led by Vice President Delcy Rodriguez, who referred to the economic difficulties in confronting COVID-19 due to the United States blockade.
Our goal is always, of course, to uphold the human rights of the Venezuelan people. Now we're talking about our country's heroic resistance, and today I must say that in these 5 years, since 2016 and 2022, Venezuela at the end of the last quarter of 2021 saw a growth in its GDP of 7.7%. This is a demonstration of our people's ability, of the belief that we are a good people, we're a peaceful people, and a generous people.
Venezuelan ambassador to the United Nations office in Geneva, Hector Constant, welcomed the review and expressed gratitude to the nations of the Bolivarian Alliance for the Peoples of Our America that supported Venezuela in the process.
We have just come out of the successful Universal Periodic Review of Venezuela. We are extremely happy given the fluent dialogue we have had with more than 100 countries, 166 delegations that participate, that offer recommendations. Some of them attempting to pursue a political agenda that we quickly stop for the sake of dignity of the principle of international law. Some of them trying to give a political connotation that we quickly stop in the interest of dignity of the principle of international law. Overall, it has been an absolutely positive balance of the recognition of human rights that we have seen in the last 5 years. We have also consciously listened to and evaluated the recommendations that have been made in order to continue deepening the social and constitutional rule of law that we are working on in a Bolivarian Venezuela. Today, I am also pleased to be here with our sisters and brothers, ambassadors of the Bolivarian Alliance for the People of Us, America, ALBA. They have joined us in personal, and their fraternity we obviously appreciate for being with us, for sharing with us this Universal Periodic Review.
And we have more stories coming up after this final short break, so stay with us. Welcome back to From the South. The Economic Community of West African States said in a statement on Tuesday that Burkina Faso's ousted president, Kabore, had resigned under threat, intimidation and pressure from the military. In a handwritten letter addressed to Lieutenant Colonel Paul Henri Sandaogo Damiba, who led the coup as president of the Patriotic Movement for Safeguarding and Restoration, Kabore said he was resigning in the best interest of the nation. After soldiers rose up at several barracks on Sunday, news of the detention of the president emerged on Monday, before a group of soldiers appeared on state television to declare that they were in control of the country. The government and the National Assembly were dissolved and the constitution suspended, as the soldiers also announced an overnight curfew. Supporters of Burkina Faso's new ruling junta rallied on Tuesday as France and the United Nations condemned the West African country's latest coup.
I'm here this morning to support Damiba, to support him in his transition to life, because he has relieved me. I am tired of crying. Our villages are occupied. We have had thousands of displaced people. Too many of our soldiers have died, which is why the whole of Burkina has been crying, and finally Damiba has come to relieve us. We are very, very happy because the Burkina army has taken its responsibility. This is what we have been asking for a long time. They have assumed their responsibility and we are proud of them, and we will fight with them. If they have to go to the front, they can count on the youth of Burkina Faso. We are ready to defend our nation now.
In reference to Burkina Faso and other Western African nations, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres said Tuesday that military coups are unacceptable, calling on armies in the region to defend their people rather than fight for power.
We have, unfortunately, in the region, terrorist groups. We have threats to the international peace and security. My appeal is for the armies of these countries to assume their professional role of armies to protect their countries and re-establish the democratic institutions. I am deeply concerned with the recent coup d'etat in Burkina Faso. The role of military must be to defend their countries and their peoples, not to attack their governments and to fight for power.
Mali's military government has called Denmark to immediately withdraw its roughly 100 special forces troops recently deployed in the troubled Sahel country. The junta, which came to power in a coup in August 2020, said in a statement read on state TV and published on social media that the deployment was undertaken without consent. The contingent of around 90 Danish soldiers arrived in Mali earlier this month to join European special forces, led by France, supposedly deployed to support the country's operations against the insurgency in the Sahel region. Denmark's foreign ministry said in a statement on Monday that they were working intensely to bring more clarity to the situation and were in contact with the Malian transitional government. The region has seen major protests against the presence of foreign troops, which many see as a move to recolonize the area.
The government of the Republic of Mali has noted with surprise the deployment on its territory of a contingent of Danish special forces with the Takuba force. The government stresses that this deployment occurred without its consent and without consideration of the additional protocol applicable to European partners in operations to intervene in Mali, in the framework of the Takuba force, which provides for the conclusion of a bilateral agreement between the Republic of Mali and the partner countries. Therefore, without prejudice to the relations of friendship and fruitful cooperation between the Republic of Mali and the Kingdom of Denmark, the government of the Republic of Mali invites the Danish side to immediately withdraw the said contingent from the territory of the Republic of Mali.
3 days of talks between the Taliban, Western diplomats and other delegates on humanitarian and to Afghan and human rights wrapped up on Tuesday in Norway. Acting Foreign Minister in Afghanistan's Taliban-Raj cabinet, Amir Khan Mudaki, praised the discussions, which he said went very well. The Taliban delegation met members of Afghan civil society on Sunday, followed by Western diplomats on Monday. They were to conclude their visit on Tuesday with meetings with a Norwegian political official and non-governmental organizations. The demands will include the possibility of providing humanitarian aid directly to the Afghan people. It will call for human rights to be respected, in particular those who are women and minorities, such as access to education and health services, the right to work and freedom of movement. Also, the Taliban are demanding that $10 billion frozen by the United States and other Western countries be released. But there is no agreement on that so far. And we have come to the end of this news brief. But remember, you can find this and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also, if you feel so inclined, please join us on social media for all the latest news. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. For TeleSUR English, I'm Gladys Quesada. Thank you for watching.